With the Munich Security Conference around the corner and the discussions on the safety and security of Europe in the context of the transatlantic cooperation, it is my pleasure to welcome here my guest, Gottemoeller, former NATO Deputy Secretary General, to discuss the latest. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So let's start with the Munich Security Conference. It is right around the corner, and in the latest security report published on the website of the event, we read, quote, "The world has entered a period of wrecking ball politics. Sweeping destruction is the order of the day." Are we expecting another showdown between Europe and the US? Maybe there is something brewing, or perhaps this is over for now.
I don't think it's over for now, but the process is underway. I don't actually expect any wrecking ball politics at the Munich Security Conference because everybody knows what the situation is now. We are in a time of radical change. The United States is occupying other space, so to say, focusing on the Western Hemisphere and on Latin America, also focusing on the Indo-Pacific. The leadership of the Trump administration's already been abundantly clear that Europe is going to have to fend for itself. And for that reason, I don't expect any new shocks to the system, although I suppose there can be some new demands about Greenland, but we know that's a tough negotiation already underway. But I do expect that there will be a lot of soul searching going on and a lot of conversation among Europeans as to how they take up the leadership mantle that the United States is setting aside.
So we know that Vice President J.D. Vance is not going to make an appearance during the conference in Munich, but we know that Marco Rubio is going to head the delegation from the U.S. Do you think there's going to be any response from the U.S. delegation when it comes to the changes that were introduced over the past 12 months when it comes to European defense?
I'm sure it will be a time for Marco Rubio. He is the National Security Advisor as well as the Secretary of State, so he has a very important role working very closely with President Trump. So he will be bolstering the messages that the president has been delivering loud and long to the NATO allies, that they really need to spend more on their own defense. They need to take more responsibility for their own security. I do want to point out, though, that these messages are not new. When I was Deputy Secretary General of NATO in the period of Trump's first term in office, he was shocking the allies at that time with his promises not to fulfill Article 5 commitments under the NATO founding treaty if the allies in Europe did not pay up. So there is a continuation. Obviously, I think the president is satisfied that at the Hague summit last summer, the allies signed up to 5% of GDP on defense and related infrastructure. So that's a good development from his point of view, but I think there will be a continuing sharp emphasis on Europe defending itself.
Let's take a look at the conference and the developments of the last 12 months from the European perspective, because over that period of time, we've seen defense spending commitments from European countries. But are European countries, in your opinion, taking the threat coming from Russia seriously? And would Europe be able to defend itself if Russia decided to strike?
I believe that the NATO alliance would be able to defend itself if Russia should decide to strike militarily on the up and up with an overt attack. That is something that NATO is well prepared for. And frankly, the Russians are weakened now by their now almost 4 years of war in Ukraine. And they've lost a good deal of armor. They've lost many, many people, as we know, over 1 million by some accounts. So I think the Russian armed forces are weakened. It'd be a foolhardy moment for them to aggressively strike against NATO Europe. But the thing we worry about nowadays, and Poland knows this very, very well, are the hybrid attacks, the infrastructure attacks, the drone incursions into European airspace, the constant cyber attacks. These are things that I think that Russia will continue to perpetrate and even intensify. And so it will be important for NATO Europe to be alert and to develop its strength, its resilience against such hybrid attacks.
I would like us to take a moment to listen to Lieutenant General Piotr Bazeusz, who is the strategic advisor to the chief of the Polish General Staff. He spoke to Aaron Daman on one of our shows On the Record. So let's have a listen.
Are you saying that when it comes to the backup plan, there are backup plans that Poland is making in the event that America would not turn up to help?
It's natural. I mean, you always, don't discuss the details, but you always have, different plans shelved that if anything happens, depending on how the situation unfolds, you pull out this particular plan or branch plan, and then you adjust it to the situation. It's always good, as we all know, to have a plan, and if necessary, use it. But again, I have no doubts that the U.S. will be with us if bad things happen.
So this was Lieutenant General Piotr Błazeusz, and he has no doubt that the U.S. would stand up to the challenge if, for example, the eastern flank of NATO was to be attacked. Do you think that the U.S. is still a reliable security provider in this part of the world?
I refer you to the national security strategy and the national defense strategy that the Trump administration has issued. In both those documents, there is a recommitment of the United States to the defense of Europe. But once again, the emphasis is on Europe taking more responsibility and being better prepared, better armed, and better trained to take more defense responsibility itself. So the United States is going to continue to be involved. There's no question about it. But I do think it will be a different involvement going forward with a lot of the requirement for planning, preparedness, training, and certainly modernization of conventional forces on the shoulders of the European countries. But I do not expect the United States to walk away from Europe. It's just going to be a different emphasis and one where the Europeans are expected to exercise more leadership.
In the same conversation with Lieutenant General Piotr Błazeusz, we also heard something that we've reported here on TVP World weeks ago about the boots on the ground, the U.S. boots on the ground when it comes to NATO and their presence, when it comes to numbers being diminished. So how is Europe going to maintain that relationship between the U.S. And the continent when it comes to learning new tactics? What do you think is going to be the solution here?
Yes, I think it's really important to keep in perspective how the numbers are perhaps being reduced somewhat. And there's another point here, and that is the U.S. Congress has very strong bipartisan support for NATO, both the senators and in the House of Representatives. And so I think there will be certain braking functions on how much the United States could withdraw from Europe, either in terms of troops or equipment, material, and weapon systems. So bear that in mind. There are some strong constraints being placed on the executive branch by the U.S. Congress. So that's one point. But the other point is I think that there was a strong buildup of U.S. troop numbers after the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and then redoubled again in 2022. Certainly, again, while I was at NATO 10 years ago, U.S. troop numbers were coming up in NATO. But if they are to be reduced, it would be, I believe, to a number that is not dissimilar to what was in NATO a decade or so ago. So not a radical shift, not a complete withdrawal of U.S. troops by any means, but perhaps, yes, some downsizing.
I would like us to take a moment to take a look at the expiry that took place, an important date on the 5th of February. Given your role as the chief U.S. negotiator for the New START, how much more dangerous is this world now that this agreement has expired last week?
I want to be clear for your viewers that the New START treaty was going to go out of force no matter what. There was no opportunity for this treaty to be further extended in a legal way. Vladimir Putin did propose last September to have an informal kind of political agreement to extend the limits of New START for another year in order to negotiate a new treaty. President Trump declined that offer. But at the same time, the reporting that I read out of Abu Dhabi last week, it seems that both the Trump administration and the Kremlin, the Putin administration, plan to engage in new talks. And for the time being, they're saying that pretty much the status quo will continue. So to make a long story short, I do not believe that there will be a quick and radical buildup of nuclear weapons either on the U.S. or Russian side. It is a dangerous moment right now because we have no treaty in force. I am heartened slightly by the fact that both Russia and the United States say they want to get back to talks and negotiate a new treaty. So let's see what happens. But at the moment, I think we really also must focus on China and the rapid Chinese nuclear modernization. The Chinese have not told us what their objectives are for that buildup, and that is what so worries the United States. The United States is concerned it's going to have two nuclear peers to deal with, China and Russia, and how does the United States deal with them alone?
Perhaps strengthening the nuclear deterrent in Europe wouldn't be such a bad idea. Our time on the show is coming to an end. However, Madam Secretary, I wanted to ask you a final question. Do you have faith that the NATO alliance can survive the Trump administration?
I absolutely do. If anything, I see that the spines are being stiffened in NATO Europe by the fact that the Trump administration is attacking NATO so constantly, attacking it with words, with arguments, and really pushing certain efforts on the alliance, such as building up defense industries in Europe. By the way, I think these efforts are needed. I was listening attentively to your previous reporting. I think it's good that NATO European countries are thinking hard about how to improve and modernize defense industries and really undertake the conventional force modernization that needs to happen.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining me on the program. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Rose Gottemoeller, former NATO Deputy Secretary General, was my guest. And so this marks the end of World News tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here for more news and features in just a moment. Good night.